Hello, everyone. My name is Devadas. I'm the CEO of the Future Moves Group, and welcome to part two of Singapore and how it handles the economic crisis. In this particular part, I'm going to be talking about the game plan. The game plan refers to our standard policy approach to dealing with economic crisis that we've adopted historically over a period of nearly 40 years. What you see is that we adopt something called an automatic stabilization approach. An automatic stabilization approach essentially refers to countercyclical intervention. That means that when the economy is doing well, the government tends to pull back from its participation in the economy, lowers its degree of fiscal impulse, which is its share of GDP contribution. And then when the economy is doing badly, it steps that up and increases its fiscal impulse and its share to try to counterbalance and create shock absorbers. This worked great when we had crises which were short and sharp and then very quickly led back to high growth. So countercyclical measures work best when they target economic activity, albeit on an inorganic basis. Inorganic means that they're not being derived from actual demand from the markets, but artificially induced by the government, but with the intent of trying to keep sectors and workforces intact long enough until organic recovery can take place. Now, so it's a perfectly legitimate form of intervention. But when it's sustained for long periods of time, as we may well be doing in this particular crisis for a year at a minimum, perhaps two, perhaps three, it presents a number of problems. Now, countercyclical interventions can be broad-based or targeted. And by targeted, we mean sectoral. Broad-based means the whole economy. And it then also focus on businesses as well as households. And when we talk about households, we're including workers. Now, the challenge is when you do too much intervention, you do it too fast and you do it too haphazardly, it can create side effects that can bite. Now, ordinarily, it would take 3 to 6 months to put a budget together. We've put 4 budgets out in 12 weeks. And the size of the budgets, total size of the budgets, which I'll come to in the next slide, is worth noting. But from now, let me deal with the side effects that we have to be cautious of. The first is a masking effect, that it becomes very difficult to tell the difference between organic growth and inorganic growth for quite a long period of time. So therefore, it makes it difficult to calibrate your intervention, your countercyclical intervention, because you don't know whether it's too soon or too late to pull back or how much to pull back. And the risk of miscalculation is potentially very expensive. Second, when it's very broad-based and when it's very loosely channeled, very loose control because you're kind of slush money into the system, it carries a lot of dead weight. Dead weight refers to a situation where a good proportion of every single dollar of the stimulus actually doesn't result in real economic benefits. It may have social and political benefits, but that's a different story. And it's subject to significant dangers of gaming. Gaming is a phenomenon where businesses essentially create projects or create programs or organize their activities in such a way as to tick all the boxes in order to be able to qualify for grants and subsidies. So instead of generating revenue from real value-adding economic activity, grants and subsidies from the government become a substitute for that revenue. And these kinds of companies tended to proliferate after 2009, and 2020 may see an entrenchment and a growth of that phenomena. And that's unfortunate and not necessarily beneficial to our economy. It can also create moral hazards. Moral hazards is where a situation where business owners don't do all that they can do to try to save their businesses or make their businesses stronger, not only during crisis years, but also during good times, because there's the expectation that the government will come in and take care of all problems. And so they can afford to be complacent, or they can afford to over leverage, or they can afford to reward themselves more than they ordinarily would, leaving very little buffer in the balance sheet of the company to be able to withstand as a shock absorber economic shocks. It can also result in a phenomenon called pushing on a string. And now pushing on a string is a situation where the more you do, the more you have to do, because essentially you've created a dependency effect on the government stimulus by carrying it on for too long and doing too much. And when you try to withdraw the stimulus, instead of organic recovery, naturally taking over and substituting for inorganic growth, you see a cliff fall, and the government becomes hostage in a situation where it runs grave political risk by withdrawing and trying to allow businesses to get back on their feet on their own, but they don't in the short term, and then there's a lot of blowback. There's also the potential of preventing creative destruction. Creative destruction is a concept that was developed by Joseph Schumpeter in the 1920s. He was an Austrian economist working out of Harvard. And it refers to the beneficial effects of competition, both in crisis and during good times, where weak firms, poorly led firms, poorly managed firms, non-innovative firms, firms that haven't invested in research or human capital should fail. And the factor inputs that are captured and contained in those firms, that's people, that's money, that's land, that's clients, that's energy, gets efficiently allocated to businesses that have been run well, have been managed well, have been invested in innovation, have invested in their people. When we have stimulus at a broad-based level, non-discriminatory, you can have a situation where poor performing companies get propped up, and sometimes propped up even more than good performing companies. And this can create a very, what we refer to as a perverse outcome. And it can lead to a situation where you get essentially discouragement on the part of the good performing companies, because they continue to have to compete against companies that should ordinarily have failed. And that's why pigs can fly. Now, the total volume of the support that the government has introduced is essentially equal to 3 annualized budgets compressed into one. And that's the size of it. And that's including tapping the past reserves and the current account budget, of which the government had a considerable already current reserve stored up because it was coming to the end of the term of government, which was its final year in office. So it's an incredible amount of money that is going to be pushed into the economy over an incredibly short time. And it's unclear really what its effects will be in terms of reviving the economy. But it is clear that it is intended to try to save jobs and to help households and also to help support businesses. So I'm not faulting the government for trying to do the best it can. The size of the intervention, though, should be an indicator to businesses and households at how seriously the government forecasts what it thinks the impact of COVID in economic terms is going to be. Essentially, the size of the budget in total it exceeds more than 25% of GDP. And therefore, the economic contraction that it expects to happen is not small. And while it's revised its economic projections, I think those revisions are going to be subject to further revisions going forward. And so we should be taking away from the numbers a signal about what the government anticipates a kind of economic devastation to look like in terms of scale and proportion, and also speed. So this brings me to the end of part 2. In part 3, I'll be talking about the past, the present, and the future of how the government has responded to economic crisis, and go into some detail. So I look forward to speaking with you tomorrow at the same time, the same channel. And again, I hope you took away something useful from this particular broadcast. And you can leave your comments on our LinkedIn page or my LinkedIn page, as well as on the YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.